Good morning, everybody. Hope you're doing well on this beautiful day. It's starting to get a little cloudy here and maybe some thunderstorms here in Calgary this afternoon. So I want to talk about wounds and trauma. Everybody has them, and they interact with us in this almost subconscious way. Let's begin here. So to be in duality, we have to have an ego. An ego is created as part of us separates from our part of source, or as a fractal of source, and an ego comes in to essentially protect us. A lot of people think an ego is about chasing for fame or making money and all that kind of stuff. That can be part of it, but its overriding goal is to protect us. So in A Course in Miracles, they talk about the entry into the human realm from being your God self. They basically say there was a mad thought, and a mad thought created what if we weren't part of God, and we were creators, so it happened. And a bunch of source split off and started to have experiences. But the only way to live in 3-dimension and to not have all our God source powers is the ego was created. And the ego is what is duality. We're separated from God, and between us and God is this thing called the ego. The ego creates our veils. It creates all the things that separate us from our God self-consciousness. So this ego comes, and from the day we're born, its role is to insulate us from and protect us from going back to God. So some of it is shame and guilt. Holy cow, I was part of God, and now I'm not part of God. I must have done something wrong. It also uses things like separating us from God, hating God, punishing our God self for all the bad things that happened. But our higher self actually chose this path, but it uses the tool of the ego to basically insulate us and keep us separated. So in our journey of awakening, we're going to have these clashes all the time with our ego. And basically, in our experience, we create a lot of things that we might call trauma or wounds or whatever as experiences. We contract with other people in this realm to basically have an experience to learn from. And a lot of people aren't going to like that, because basically they're defined around their whole self-definition is around something that may have happened in their childhood, from their parents, from past lovers, etc. And these things basically become part of our story, become part of what insulates us. And our ego basically sits there and works at a subconscious level, and basically will encourage us to live defined by something that it can control. So what's the narrative around a past rape or a trauma or a violence that you had, or a parent that abandoned you, or whatever? The ego uses these things, and it gets really good at using these things to basically keep us insulated from seeing a bigger version of ourselves. It'll actually shrink us in a lot of ways, even though it wants to have power and all this kind of stuff. The power is somewhat towards people, but a lot of it's around us. Because if we become aware and we start to see through this tool called the ego as owning the whole store, it loses its power. So it creates up a wound, for example, or a trauma. Let's start there. Let's say a person had violence as a child, or they were abused as a child. So we'll start with that. So as a child, we don't even know that that's good or bad or right or wrong or whatever. But societally, as time goes on, we start to realize that our power was taken from us, or somebody inserted their wound or whatever into us to control us, to keep us small. And maybe it was for their pleasure, or it was for some demented version of what they think is truth. And essentially what happens as we start to grow, we want to protect ourselves from that. The ego's helping us to protect ourselves from that. So we'll do things like, I'll lock my door before bed so that I don't get abused, or I will always wear full clothing around the house because that won't make that person drawn to us, or whatever. And we start to create these rules and fences around ourselves that help to protect us from having that. Now, at the meantime, when this is all happening, our subconscious and our ego is basically looking at all of our experience. So maybe that happened as a child, but now all of a sudden your lovers are having similar traits, or they're twisted into looking more like that person. And basically now all of a sudden you create more rules. It's like, okay, I can't have this person in my life, and this is too tough, or I can't deal with triggers, this is too much. So we create this insulation, and it basically sucks us away and builds this little cave or cage, or whatever you want to call it. And this thing we kind of sit in and we suffer in, and our whole life is limited. And guess what? Our ego has control of everything. It just sits there and says, okay, I'm happy now. And it just gives you little reassurances. Sometimes, what does Akima say? I refer to it as post-traumatic growth. I've learned that negative experiences can spur positive change. I can't see it all. And recognition, absolutely. And that's exactly where we're getting to. So this is the process that's happening, and you're going to see it in your life, and you're going to be unhappy about things, and you're going to see yourself as a victim, and that this always happened to me, etc. And you can self-define yourself to be that. But at the same time, realize that your higher self, your higher perspective, your part of God that was you, that came before the veil, chose to have these experiences for us to learn, to grow, and to become better human beings through. And some of the darkest stuff that we'll ever experience is the stuff that crushes us and builds us into a diamond over time. And as we become that diamond, as love starts to grow inside of us, we become a new person. Despite all the programming, all the stuff, all the ego stuff, etc., we eventually rally ourselves to the point where we're going to stand and start to break down that ego, release the ego control, and release the definition of the wounds and all these kind of things. And suddenly we can start to begin to self-love ourselves and say, holy crap, I grew out through all this. This has helped me. It might have been the hardest thing you've ever done. It might have drove you to addiction, suicidal, etc., etc. That's the ego winning. But eventually you get fed up and you say, no, I'm not going to live this life anymore. I'm not going to live this life where all these wounds are. We also have a world where a lot of darkness is outside, and it's using these wounds to feed off us and to keep us small and to keep us angry and to keep us frustrated so they can control us. But you and your higher self chose a higher path. You chose to see it, to see underneath the truth of it all, to see the boundaries, to see the things that were taught by our parents that were from their wounds, and left us open to having these bad experiences. And eventually you're going to grow and you're going to become what we call in shamanism the medicine for the wound, for the trauma. You're going to be able to speak openly with other people that have these same wounds and traumas, and you'll be able to show them a better perspective. You're going to show them a path through. You're going to be a guide, a way shower, whatever. You don't have to fix anybody, but people with like vibrations and like experiences are drawn to people that have the medicine. Maybe they're having trouble finding it. Maybe they're having trouble seeing a few things. And we can be that choice. We can, by talking like this or sharing like Akima is here, we can show an example for other people. Say that this isn't the world trying to kill us. This is the world polishing us and crushing us to become a diamond that shines and stays positive and happy despite bad things going on. What does Akima say? Yes, without early intervention and help, traumatized children grow up to be traumatized. Adults often having abnormal reactions to stress, chronic. Yes, so our parents have a lineage trauma is what I call that. the world has punished and smashed and whatever, and we get some of the genetic history of our family, and it can go up. In shamanism, they say 7 to 10 generations, and if you start adding that all up, you're part of a collective of maybe 100,000 people that are all genetically related that are carrying these wounds. And we've come here at this time and place to be the medicine, to be the healing, to show a path through that maybe hasn't existed before. And it's time for that cycle to end, time for the cycle of all this trauma and all this unhappiness and all this fear to be dissolved. And we're doing it. We're being it. It may feel like you're punished by your higher self and God, and you're going to have gone through some sickening, disgusting stuff that nobody should have had to experience. But to get through and be light on the other side, to get through and take the positives and take the growth, and then be able to shine and smile to people and say, fuck, I went through that. And yes, it was hell. And I want to hear you talk about it. I want to hear you tell me your experience. But eventually, we're going to not be stuck in it anymore once we've been witnessed and people have heard that this thing happened and it wasn't fun and it happened to them too. And the more we vulnerably share, we make it okay to have these wounds, and we make it okay to talk about them, and we make it okay to rise up, to shine, and to be the healing, to be the vibrational clearance of this, to put it into the field of the collective so we can all rise up and grow and smile, because it hasn't been fun. But it was a tool that shaped us. It's a tool of pressure and creating that diamond. How could you ever be tested so hard than to have gone through this experience? And now you've gone through it and you've taken the good from it, and now you can speak to the good from it for other people. And to speak of the wounds of the people that are creating, to speak of the lineage trauma that they're dealing with. Some of the people don't even have any control of their life. They're just being a wound or a contract for another person to cause pain, to cause suffering. Maybe they're also having their own healing in that they have to be a perpetrator, you have to be a victim, or vice versa. Sometimes you'll be in the perpetrator energies. These energies exist, and they're shaping us. They're polishing us. They're grinding us down. They're making us small. They're feels like hurting us, but there's a purpose. So see that the wound and the trauma that you're maybe going through has a higher purpose. It's not a simple step to start to accept that this happened for a reason, but we have to self-love ourself first. We have to choose to take self-responsibility, say this is happening for me and not to me, because to me creates this victim consciousness, and then we have no power. We can't deal with it. We can only fix it by hurting that other person or stopping this from happening. But if we say, okay, this is happening for me, what boundaries did I have? What things was I taught as a child? What did my parents infect me with in some ways that's negative thinking, or being too open, or not having boundaries, or not being able to say yes or no? And once you start to see that that happened, and you picked it up as a child, and you had no choice to accept it because you had no way of knowing what was a wounded perspective or a healthy perspective, but now you're an adult and you're saying, okay, there was the wound, there was the way I was thinking before. I don't need to think that way. I don't need to believe that anymore. And all of a sudden we start to say, holy shit, this showed me something about myself that couldn't have been shown in any other way. And once you start to recognize that, your self-love starts to grow. It's like, okay, yeah, I didn't consciously choose some of this stuff. I allowed it into my system. I had no choice. It came and happened. Now, how am I going to choose differently? So instead of creating a armor or something that blocks us from experience, it's going to say, hey, I'm going to speak up, and I'm going to say, no way, I'm an adult now, and I'm not a child anymore, and I won't let this continue to happen. And this beautiful thing starts to happen, because now you're consciously choosing, you're starting to set boundaries for yourself, you're starting to be able to speak and your throat's not choked off, and you're saying, no more, I'm making a change. I will not allow people to do this. And you'll speak out against other people doing it to other people, and share your experience, to share, this was not fun, this was not easy, this was not whatever, but here I am. I'm shining. I'm love, and I've created love for myself, and I'm amazing. So those wounds and traumas are things we're going to have to look at. And these things that shaped us and created a diamond from us, as soon as we can start to recognize that there was a purpose for it, and it was teaching and sharing new perspective, we can start to move out of the victim, the powerlessness, and we can start to take our life back and make a choice. And that's what it's all about. That's what awakening is all about, is to move through these things and come out the top. Maybe it was messy, maybe it was dirty, maybe you didn't do it the best way you could, maybe you hurt people along the way or whatever, but that's the experience that we're all having. And if you did the best you can, that's all you can do. And that's amazing. Because if you made it through, or you hit bottom 6 or 8 or 10 or 20 times, and you almost killed yourself or whatever, you felt it. You experienced all of it. And eventually you made a choice that was better, but you didn't know you had a choice. That's a huge journey. So keep that in mind when you're sitting in struggle and suffering and feel really bad about yourself, or feel like you're not doing the best you could, because you are. This place is in freaking tense. And you made it. You're here. You've survived it. Maybe this little drop of wisdom will help you climb the rest of the way out. Maybe it'll piss you off. It's all okay. But this is the truth that I've found in my journey, and I feel so much better. That's why my eyes shine, and I want to do these lives, because I did it. Messy, dirty, but I did it. And I'll do better from here on. And if I don't, well, it's part of the experience as well. So, love you all. Breathe deep. Let it go. Let the seed sit for a while. You don't have to accept it. You may not like it. And that probably means that there's something in there for you. But at least you have a new opportunity for awareness. So, I love you all. Have a great one.